You are listening to the Love and Confidence Podcast, episode number 117. Welcome to the Love and Confidence Podcast. If you're a woman who wants to feel more irresistible, have more fun, and create deeper and more authentic connections, this podcast is for you. I am your host, certified life coach Lærke Nielsen, and I help you become the best and most confident version of yourself so you can attract the love life you desire. Let's get started. Hey friend, welcome back to the podcast. How to be more interesting, that's the topic of today, and I wanted to talk about this because I know the thought that I am not that interesting or I'm not interesting enough is a thought that comes up for some of you sometimes. And especially if you also have other negative thoughts about yourself, like I am not smart enough, I am not pretty enough, I am not skinny enough, and so on. All these kind of thoughts sort of go together. It's like they're each other's cousins. And I often hear this: I'm afraid that I'm not interesting enough. Maybe he's going to find someone who's more interesting than me. And so I want to help you free yourself from that. I want to help you let go of this kind of thoughts. And there are two different approaches to letting go of a thought like this. Of course, there is a mindset approach, and then there is also a shift that you can make, a more practical part of it. So the mindset approach is what we're going to start with. And I want you to try to see what this thought does to you. Because many of our thoughts have the power of becoming self-fulfilling prophecies. Because when we think something, it leads us to feel a certain way. And that again will lead us to show up in a specific way, to take actions or inactions. And that, of course, creates a result in our life. So if you imagine thinking, maybe I'm not that interesting, I'm not interesting enough, you are on a date with a man, or you are dating someone, you've been dating him for a while, and especially if you like him, you're going to start wondering if you are good enough for him, or if you are interesting enough for him, and you think that he's very interesting. Then if you start thinking, I'm actually not that interesting, I'm a little bit boring, it's going to completely impact how you show up. You can imagine a concrete situation when you're on a date with this man and you have thoughts like, I am too boring, or I am not interesting enough. How does that make you feel in the moment? It kind of shuts you down, right? You might feel awkward. You might feel empty. You don't get any ideas of things to say that could make you more interesting. You might feel a little bit of shame as well, because it's almost like there's something wrong with you when you think that. And if this thought feels very heavy on you, it's really gonna shut you down. Maybe your brain tries to search for reasons that you are interesting, and then every time you think of something, you also have another thought that says, that is not that interesting. It's not interesting. You are a little bit boring. If we have this kind of self-talk running in our mind, it makes you more quiet. It makes you shut down. It makes you censor yourself. And in the end, that means you don't share as much as you would normally do. You don't just say what's on your mind. You really think about whether this is interesting or not before you say something. And maybe in the end, you actually become less interesting to be with because you're not sharing who you are. You're not saying what's on your mind. And in that way, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's a very classical way that we do with ourselves when we have a thought about something. It makes us feel a certain way, and that leads us to take actions, or in this case, a lot of inactions that in the end create a result. And this result will prove the thought right. And you can try to make this exercise with any other kind of negative self-talk. When we think it enough, we make ourselves behave in a way that proves the thought to be right. So, I remember when I was a child, I was not only very introvert, which I still am, I was also very shy. And sometimes I had some situations where someone told me that I was very quiet or even too quiet. And every time that happened, actually, it made me even more quiet because it made me so conscious about myself and really trying to push myself to be less quiet. And every time I tried to push myself to speak more, I had absolutely no idea what to say. My brain got completely blank. And if I had something, a small idea, I would also instantly decide that it wasn't interesting enough and it wasn't something cool to say. Or I would get the idea when the topic already shifted and people were talking about something else. So, me focusing a lot on having to be less quiet, having to speak more, and trying to force myself to speak more and be more outgoing actually had the opposite effect. I ended up becoming more quiet and more self conscious. And I had some people in my life who actually didn't really encourage me to be more myself and be more comfortable with who I was, but who did the opposite. So growing up, I always had this thought about myself that I'm too quiet and I have to be more extroverted. I have to learn how to say more and speak up more. Otherwise, I will have a problem. And it wasn't before I finally relaxed and gave myself permission to be quiet when I don't have anything interesting to say, to just relax about it and not make quietness mean something negative, not make it mean that there's something wrong with me, there's something missing in me, but just make it mean that we are different and we get to be quiet when we don't have anything to say. I mean, there's already a lot of people out there who talks a lot and maybe too much. So sometimes it can actually be really good change to be with someone who speaks less. But when I finally gave myself that permission, that's when my brain started to relax, and all of a sudden I had a lot of ideas of things to say and things to share. I could relax and be myself. And that was just such an eye opener. The fact that when you stop pushing yourself to do something from the approach or from the perspective that there's something wrong with me, I have to change in order to be normal. When you stop doing that and you just accept who you are and accept that not everyone is talking all the time and it's not a problem to be quiet once in a while, then you can actually become more talkative and you can open up the door to see what is really going on and who are you when you're not trying to push yourself to be someone you're not. So when we think we're not interesting enough or we are not funny enough or smart enough or whatever, usually it's the same subtitle that runs across all these thoughts. It's basically just, I am not good enough. And so you want to start by changing your thoughts around that. And when it comes to being interesting, you can work your way around trying to shift that thought into something else. Because what does it even mean to be interesting? And what does it even mean to be boring? Like, it's a very subjective thing. You can't say that someone is interesting because for some people they won't be, and for other people they will be. And someone can be boring to some people and not to others. It is a very subjective thing. So it doesn't even make sense to speak about whether you are interesting or not because it's not a question that you can answer, right? So why even bother with that? You could think about changing that thought into, it's not my job to be interesting. My only job is to be myself. And how about shifting your thoughts about being interesting into being interested? Being interested in the person you're getting to know on a date. And that leads me to part number 2 of this exercise because, of course, the first step, you always want to work on your thoughts around something and really question and challenge if that really is true when you have a negative thought, because most of the time it's just not true. And then the second part is the more practical part of it, where I want to share with you that you always become more interesting to people, no matter who they are, if you show them interest. That is actually one of the ways where we can say most people will find you interesting, even if they don't have the same hobbies or passions or interests as you, if you show them interest. And there are 2 reasons why this is a really good approach. And the first one, of course, when you ask questions and you dive deeper into people's answers, you ask more questions, you are really present with them, and you really show them that you want to get to know them and you are genuinely interested in who they are, then they will perceive you as someone who's interesting to be with. They will enjoy your company. And the other reason why this is a good approach is that once we start focusing on someone else, we stop thinking so much about ourselves. We stop worrying about whether we are interesting or not. but focus more on getting to know the other person. Tony Robbins always says we only suffer when we focus on ourselves. And in this situation here, it's really true. The more we focus on ourselves in the sense of, am I good enough? Was I interesting enough? Did I say the right thing? Does he still like me? Could I have done something differently? Could I have answered something differently when he asked me that question, and so on? Not only do we suffer more because we are very much in our own minds and criticizing ourselves, we are also much less present. So you're much less present on a date if your thoughts are constantly circling around whether you are good enough. So the moment your main focus shifts from, am I good enough, or am I interesting enough, am I funny enough and smart enough, and so on, and turns into the direction of getting to know the man in front of you. What is he all about? What is driving him? What motivates him? What's he passionate about? What gets him out of bed in the morning? What is his biggest dream? And what is his biggest fear? When you focus on that instead, you forget yourself for a moment and you become present with him. And that is something that can be felt. You can feel that shift in energy. And this is a trick that you can use in any social situation, not only dating. So try to be interested and focus on the other person, to stop thinking so much about yourself and whether what you are saying is interesting or not. Just be interested in the other person, and you will be perceived as more interesting and definitely enjoyable to be with, better company, because you are present, you are asking questions, you're showing your genuine interest. And when you show interest, this is basically about being curious, asking questions. And if you feel at some point you're running dry, you don't have more questions, there's a little word you can always ask, basically no matter what he's saying or what he's answering you. And that is why. Why do you think that is? Why do you like that? Why do you think so? Why do you have that opinion? And so on. You can always ask that question to go a layer deeper, and it's actually a small but very powerful word. It will open up new doors in a conversation. So this was just a short episode just to give you some tips on what to do if you have these thoughts about not being interesting enough. Stop thinking about whether you are interesting or not and start being interested, because your job is not to be interesting, your job is to be yourself. And then go work on your thoughts about yourself, because you are enough and you are already perfect as you are, even if you're growing and learning and changing on the journey. Nobody else knows how to be you as well as you do. And don't forget, no matter if you're single or not, you are loved, you are worthy, and you are important in this world. Have a wonderful week. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast and you want to get support from a coach on your love journey, I invite you to book a free consult call with me. You will find the link in the show notes. And also, don't forget to subscribe, and I would love it if you would rate and review this podcast, and then you'll also help other women find it.